Europe should be a third power in the world order, along with the US and China. These were the French president's words after a state visit to China in April this year. He also emphasized that Europe should not become a vassal of the US or China and must avoid being drawn into any conflict over Taiwan. This is not the first time that Macron has pushed for European strategic autonomy, but this time it has drawn significant criticism from both sides of the pond. In the US, a senior Republican senator suggested that if Macron spoke for all of Europe, then the US should consider focusing its foreign policy on containing China and leave Europe to handle the war in Ukraine. And in the EU, a senior German politician warned the French president that his policy and remarks could lead to a geopolitical dead end for Europe. This has not deterred Macron, however, as in an even more recent speech, he presented his vision for a more sovereign Europe. This video will look at this speech and at his 5-pillar plan, and stick around for our opinion at the very end. Macron's first pillar towards a more sovereign Europe is competitiveness and stronger EU integration.
You cannot be a strong role model, you cannot promote your identity, you cannot defend on the long run the European model if you are not competitive and you don't put yourself in a situation to be the one to produce the best-in-class solutions. This is why competitiveness is requested, and this is why you have to pass reforms.
Macron claims that significant EU reform is required, including much more integration to remain competitive on the world stage. To address this, he mentioned that the EU needs to simplify and streamline its regulation, focus much more on higher education and training, create a capital market union to better distribute capital, and strengthen the EU single market. He used an interesting example of European startups having to navigate 27 regulators in the EU, one for each member state. In the US or China, there's only one regulator, meaning that their domestic markets are simply much more lucrative for new companies. Maybe this is a reason why so many tech startups leave Europe. Macron's second pillar is to create industrial policies.
If you don't have industrial policy, you cannot create progressively your autonomy, or at least your de-risking on energy. This is impossible. Because our competitors today are interfering in the market, matter of fact.
Industrial policy aims to encourage economic growth through investment. Macron argues that without it, we cannot achieve a net zero economy, energy autonomy, or strengthen our chips industry, as China and the US have a competitive advantage due to their own policies. For instance, the US spent $391 billion on energy and climate change last year, while China invested billions in their Made in China 2025 plan. Macron advocates for an EU industrial policy at both the federal and national level to promote self-reliance. This brings us to Macron's third pillar, protection of our interests.
Indeed, we have to accept to protect vital interests and strategic assets when we consider they could be put at risk. We recognize, for good reasons, that we need a screening of these foreign investments on some critical assets.
Macron is very concerned that over the last 2 decades, a lot of infrastructure has been sold or partially sold to Chinese companies. While the EU has already put into place some screening mechanisms, Macron emphasized the need to protect EU interests by stopping foreign investment in some critical assets, such as energy companies, defense companies, ports, and so on. He wants to enforce this on the digital side too, regarding social media, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. While he is a believer of free speech, Macron sees a security threat in exposing ourselves too much to foreign algorithms and propaganda. This could interfere in education of our children or even our functioning democracy. The fourth pillar of Macron's plan is reciprocity.
We should stop signing and accepting trade agreements with governments and people which don't respect Paris Agreement and our biodiversity commitments.
What Macron means is that we need the same rules for producers abroad and our producers at home. In the EU, we have strict rules on our producers regarding sustainability. If we simply allow trade with partners who do not follow these rules, we will destroy our own market, as we cannot compete on price. Therefore, all future trade agreements should include commitments towards climate change and biodiversity. Macron also mentioned that trade agreements need to have a clear strategic interest for the EU. For example, how can the agreement give the EU privileged access to critical raw materials? The fifth and final pillar of Macron's plan is cooperation.
We have to promote our agenda through a series of cooperation in order to strengthen and extend our multilateral rules and instruments, and precisely to do more together and push this European model internationally.
Here Macron wants to revitalize international organizations such as the WTO, which he claims are not working at the moment and needs to be promoted more strongly by the EU. Only through such international organizations can we ensure compliance of third countries to a high standard of values that will help us address global problems like climate change. Macron then finished his speech with the following.
We want to be open, we want allies, we want good friends, we want partners, but we always want to be in a situation to choose them, not to be 100% dependent on them. European sovereignty is not just a concept or a fantasy, but it's absolutely, in a dangerous world, a necessity to live, dream for ourselves as Europeans. Thank you.
So here's what we think. Macron makes a solid point. The EU is currently very dependent on both the US and China. China in terms of trade, as they are our biggest trading partner, and the US in terms of security, with the war in Ukraine likely looking very different without US support. We are not saying the EU shouldn't have partners, but simply that the EU would benefit to be able to stand on its own 2 feet, so that we can make our decisions and retain our sovereignty. We do not want another situation where a country like Russia can weaponize its energy exports and hold Europe at ransom. But what do you think? More strategic autonomy or not? For more detail on the EU's dependency on China, see our video below called When China Invades Taiwan, Will the European Union Help? And as always, please subscribe and like the video. And if you want to support the channel further, please consider signing up to Patreon.